The war was over, or so they thought. The ashes of the great conflict between humanity and the Dominion had barely settled across the scarred systems of the galaxy when the first whispers began to surface, hushed rumors of something far older, far more terrifying than anything either species had ever encountered. In the darkest corners of space, where ancient stars had long since died and forgotten worlds drifted in eternal silence, something stirred. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus, humanity's flagship vessel, watching the distant glow of a dying nebula paint the void in shades of crimson and gold. 3 months had passed since the final Dominion stronghold had fallen, yet victory felt hollow. Too many good people had been lost, too many worlds reduced to radioactive wastelands. The galaxy was free, but at what cost? "Commander," came the voice of Lieutenant Marcus Kane, her trusted aide, breaking through her somber reverie. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Archaeological Division. Dr. Vega says it's urgent." Sarah turned from the viewport, her weathered face reflecting years of combat and command. "Put her through." Dr. Elena Vega's holographic form materialized before them, her usually composed demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement and fear. "Sarah, we found something. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about galactic history." The transmission flickered, showing images of a desolate world shrouded in perpetual storms. Massive obsidian obelisks pierced the planet's surface like ancient spears thrust into the earth by titans. Strange geometric patterns covered their surfaces, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that made the very air seem to vibrate with power. "This is Kepler 7739, Dr. Vega continued, her voice tight with apprehension. "We discovered it during our survey of the Outer Rim territories. Initial scans suggested it was just another dead rock, but when we landed..." She paused, collecting herself. "Sarah, the energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's been dormant for millennia, but it's starting to wake up." The camera panned across the alien landscape, revealing structures that defied comprehension. Towers that seemed to twist through dimensions, their surfaces reflecting light that shouldn't exist. And at the center of it all, partially buried beneath eons of accumulated debris, lay something that made Sarah's blood run cold, a perfect sphere of crystalline material, easily the size of a small moon, pulsing with veins of violet energy. "The artifact," Dr. Vega whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb whatever slumbered within. "We believe it's some kind of containment device. The energy signatures suggest it's been holding something back, but the seals are failing. We estimate we have maybe days before whatever's inside breaks free." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's recycled atmosphere. "What about the ruins? Any indication of who built them?" "That's just it, the architecture doesn't match any known species. Not human, not Dominion, not any of the lesser races we've encountered. The construction techniques are beyond anything we understand. Some of the materials don't even exist in our periodic table." Dr. Vega's image flickered as interference washed across the transmission. "Sarah, I think we're looking at the remnants of something that ruled the galaxy long before any of us reached for the stars." As if summoned by her words, the artifact in the transmission began to pulse more rapidly, its light casting eerie shadows across the alien landscape. The storm clouds above swirled in response, lightning crackling between the obelisks in patterns that seemed almost intelligent. "Get your team off that planet," Sarah ordered immediately. "Full evacuation, now." "It's too late," Dr. Vega replied, her voice filled with dread. "The storms have intensified. Our ships can't breach the atmospheric interference. We're trapped here until..." The transmission cut to static as a brilliant flash of light erupted from the artifact. When the interference cleared, Sarah could see the sphere had changed. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and through those fissures, something moved in the darkness within. "Commander," Lieutenant Kane called urgently from his station. "We're detecting massive energy fluctuations across multiple sectors. It's not just that one planet. There are dozens of similar signatures activating simultaneously across the galaxy." Sarah's mind raced as the implications struck her. This wasn't an isolated discovery, it was a network, a galaxy-spanning system that had been lying dormant, waiting. "Red alert," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced the impossible before. "All ships, battle stations. And get me a direct line to High Command. They need to know that our war with the Dominion may have been just the beginning." Deep within the crystalline prison on Kepler, 7739, ancient minds stirred for the first time in 10,000 years. They had felt the touch of lesser beings upon their sacred seals, sensed the crude attempts to understand their technology. How amusing that these primitives thought themselves the masters of the galaxy. The architects, as they had once been known, had ruled the stars when these upstart species were still crawling in primordial ooze. They had shaped worlds, commanded the very forces of creation and destruction, until their own hubris had led to their imprisonment by a coalition of their former subjects. The ancestors of both humanity and the Dominion had united in desperation to bind them, knowing that only together could they hope to contain such power. But seals weakened over time, and the architects were patient. They had waited through the rise and fall of civilizations, through wars that consumed entire sectors, all while slowly, methodically, working to free themselves from their crystalline tombs. Now, as the barriers that held them began to crumble, they reached out with tendrils of pure thought, touching the minds of those foolish enough to approach their prisons. Dr. Vega gasped as alien thoughts invaded her consciousness, showing her visions of the galaxy as it once was, worlds transformed into perfect geometric patterns, stars rearranged to form massive symbols visible from across the galactic core, entire species evolved and modified to serve a higher purpose. The seals, she whispered, her voice no longer entirely her own. They were meant to break. It was always meant to happen. We were guided here. Around her, her research team stood transfixed, their eyes reflecting the violet glow emanating from the widening cracks in the sphere. They could feel the presence pressing against their minds, ancient and vast beyond comprehension. Some wept at the beauty of the visions they were shown, while others screamed at the implications of what was coming. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out as other archaeological teams, drawn by mysterious energy readings and ancient maps that had suddenly become comprehensible, discovered their own architect sites. On worlds both civilized and wild, the crystalline prisons began their final countdown to release. In the halls of power on New Earth, Admiral Harrison received Sarah's transmission with growing alarm. The old soldier had seen enough war to last several lifetimes, but the fear in Commander Chen's voice told him this was something unprecedented. "Send the word," he commanded his staff. "Full mobilization of all remaining fleet assets. And contact the Dominion survivors, whatever's coming, we're going to need their help." The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity had spent decades fighting the Dominion, only to now seek alliance with their former enemies against a threat neither had imagined possible. Meanwhile, in the shattered remnants of Dominion space, Overlord Thane received similar reports from his scattered forces. The proud warrior had led his people through their darkest hour after their defeat, maintaining a fragile peace with the humans while rebuilding what remained of their civilization. Now, as his tactical displays lit up with impossible energy readings, he realized that all their previous conflicts had been mere skirmishes compared to what was approaching. The first seal broke with a sound that resonated across dimensions. On Kepler, 7739, Dr. Vega and her team watched in horrified fascination as the crystalline sphere split open like a blooming flower of light and shadow. From within emerged something that defied easy description, a being of pure energy wrapped in shifting geometries, its form constantly changing as if reality itself couldn't quite contain its presence. The architect stood for the first time in millennia, stretching limbs that existed in more dimensions than the observers could perceive. When it spoke, its voice resonated not through the air but directly into the minds of all who heard it. "The children have grown numerous," it mused, its attention turning toward the cowering humans. "And they have learned to make war upon themselves. How, primitive. But perhaps they might serve our purposes yet." Dr. Vega felt her sanity slipping as the being's full attention focused upon her. In that gaze, she saw the history of the galaxy laid bare, the rise and fall of countless civilizations, all guided by the subtle influence of the architects. Even humanity's rebellion against the Dominion had been orchestrated, a careful manipulation to weaken both species and prepare for this moment of return. You understand now, the architect continued, its form solidifying into something almost humanoid but impossibly tall and elegant. Your wars, your struggles, your very existence, all part of a greater design. We are the gardeners, and this galaxy is our garden. It has grown wild in our absence, but that will soon be corrected. Across space, Sarah felt a chill of premonition as her ship's sensors detected the impossible, faster-than-light travel without the use of known propulsion methods. Dozens of energy signatures were moving through space at velocities that should have been impossible, heading toward populated systems with clear intent. All ships, emergency jump to the Centauri system, she commanded. If these things are heading for the core worlds, we need to get there first. But even as the Prometheus and its escort fleet engaged their jump drives, Sarah knew they were already too late. The architects hadn't spent millennia in prison to emerge unprepared. They had been watching, learning, planning for this exact moment. The first attack came without warning. The Proxima colony, home to 12 million souls, simply vanished from all sensors. Not destroyed, vanished, as if it had never existed at all. The only trace left behind was a geometric pattern of energy that hung in space where the planet had been, beautiful and terrible in its perfect symmetry. By the void, Lieutenant Kane breathed, staring at the readings. How do you fight something that can erase entire worlds? But the architects weren't interested in simple destruction. As more colonies fell silent, it became clear they were being transformed rather than eliminated. Reconnaissance drones sent to investigate returned with impossible footage, worlds reshaped into perfect crystalline structures, their populations alive but changed, their minds linked to some vast collective consciousness that served the architect's will. The message was clear: submit or be remade. Sarah stood before the assembled fleet commanders, both human and Dominion, in the emergency council chambers aboard the Prometheus. The former enemies now faced each other across the conference table, united by desperation and the growing realization that their previous conflicts had been meaningless compared to the threat they now faced. Preliminary reports confirm what we feared, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The architects aren't just powerful, they're reshaping the fundamental nature of reality itself. Every world they touch becomes part of their growing domain, and every being they convert adds to their collective power. Overlord Thane, his scaled features bearing the scars of countless battles, leaned forward. Our combined fleets number less than 1,000 ships. Intelligence suggests they have unlimited resources and technology that makes our weapons look like primitive clubs. How do we fight gods? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah looked around the table at faces both human and alien, all showing the same mixture of determination and barely controlled fear. These were warriors who had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This was a force that operated beyond the laws of physics as they understood them. We fight smart, Sarah replied finally. Dr. Vega's team managed to transmit some data before their sight went dark. The architects may be powerful, but they're not invulnerable. The fact that they were imprisoned once means they can be imprisoned again. She activated the holographic display, showing the energy patterns they had detected during the awakening. Look at these readings. See how the power fluctuates. There's a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat. Whatever's maintaining their reality-altering abilities requires constant energy flow. If we can disrupt that flow, we might have a chance, finished Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead scientist who had taken over Dr. Vega's research. But getting close enough to their core systems would be suicide. Their defensive capabilities are beyond anything we've encountered. Thane's mandibles clicked in what passed for a grim smile among his people. Then we make them come to us. Draw them into a trap where their advantages are minimized. The plan that emerged was desperate and brilliant in equal measure. Using the combined technological resources of both species, they would create a massive energy disruption field in the Vega system, a dead zone where the architects' reality warping abilities would be severely limited. Then, using themselves as bait, they would lure the ancient beings into a conventional battle where human and Dominion weapons might actually prove effective. It meant sacrificing entire fleets to create the trap, but as reports continued to pour in of worlds being transformed across the galaxy, they all knew it might be their only chance. 3 days later, the combined armada gathered in the Vega system, their ships arranged in a massive defensive formation around the artificial disruption field generators. Human vessels, sleek and angular, hung in space alongside the more organic curves of Dominion warships. For the first time in decades, the two species worked as one, their crews sharing tactical data and coordinating strategies that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching the tactical displays as the last of the generator arrays came online. The space around them shimmered as reality itself was forced into new parameters, creating a bubble of normal physics in an increasingly chaotic galaxy. "All stations report ready," Lieutenant Kane announced. "The trap is set." "And our guests?" Sarah asked, though she could already feel the answer in the unnatural chill that had settled over the bridge. Long-range sensors detect multiple architect vessels approaching from 3 vectors. ETA 12 minutes. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of all the lives that depended on the next few hours. When she opened them again, her gaze was steel. "All ships, this is Commander Chen. Today we don't fight as humans or Dominion. We fight as children of this galaxy, defending our right to exist. Whatever happens, make it count." The architects arrived like a storm made manifest. Their vessels were things of impossible beauty, geometric constructs that seemed to exist partially outside normal space, their surfaces reflecting light that came from no visible source. As they approached the disruption field, their forms began to shift and flicker, their reality warping abilities hampered by the artificial constraints humanity had imposed. The lead architect's ship was a massive polyhedron that rotated slowly on multiple axes, each face inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. From its core, a voice reached out across space, speaking directly into the minds of every being in the system. Clever little children, the voice was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons in its tone. You seek to bind us with crude manipulations of spacetime. But you understand so little of what you face. Despite the disruption field, Sarah could feel the architect's presence pressing against her consciousness, offering visions of a perfected galaxy where war and suffering were obsolete, where every being served in harmony toward a greater purpose. For a moment, the offer was almost tempting: peace, order, an end to the chaos that had defined her life. Then she remembered the footage from the transformed worlds, the hollow eyes of beings who had been remade into perfect servants, and her resolve hardened. "Fire," she commanded. The combined fleet opened fire as one, thousands of weapons unleashing humanity's and the Dominion's most advanced technologies simultaneously. Plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, gravity bombs, and exotic particle beams converged on the architect formation in a display of destructive force that should have vaporized anything in its path. But the architects were not defenseless. Even within the disruption field, they wielded power beyond conventional understanding. The attack struck barriers of crystallized spacetime that appeared around their ships like shields made of frozen reality. Most of the weapon's fire simply ceased to exist as it struck these defenses, while other shots were redirected back at their origins with devastating effect. The Valiant, a human destroyer that had survived the entire Dominion War, simply vanished as its own antimatter torpedo was reflected back at it. The explosion that should have followed never came. The ship and its crew were simply erased from existence, as if they had never been. "Maintain formation," Sarah shouted over the chaos. "Keep those generators online at all costs." But the architects were adapting faster than anyone had anticipated. As their ships moved deeper into the disruption field, they began to change tactics. Unable to rely on their reality-warping abilities, they revealed conventional weapons of their own, if anything wielded by beings who viewed the laws of physics as mere suggestions could be called conventional. Beams of pure entropy lanced out from the architect vessels, aging anything they touched by millennia in seconds. Human ships found their hulls corroding to dust even as their crews tried to respond. Dominion vessels, with their more organic construction, proved slightly more resistant but still suffered catastrophic damage as their living metal hulls were subjected to accelerated time. The battle quickly devolved into a desperate melee as both sides closed to point-blank range. Sarah watched from the Prometheus as the Iron Will, a massive Dominion battlecruiser, rammed itself into the side of an architect vessel in a kamikaze run that finally managed to breach one of their reality shields. The explosion that followed was spectacular, but when the debris cleared, the architect ship was already regenerating, its damaged sections rebuilding themselves from some inexhaustible resource. "They're learning our tactics in real time," reported Commander Torres from the tactical station. "Every weapon we use becomes less effective as they adapt their defenses." But humanity and the Dominion had learned a few things about adaptation themselves during their long war. As the battle raged, smaller strike craft began darting between the larger vessels, using speed and unpredictability to avoid the architect's more devastating weapons. These fighters carried a new weapon, devices based on Dr. Vega's research that could temporarily disrupt the energy patterns maintaining architect technology. The first successful strike came from an unlikely source. Captain Zara al-Rashid, piloting a converted mining vessel that had been hastily armed for the battle, managed to get close enough to one of the smaller architect ships to deploy her disruption device. For just a moment, the alien vessel flickered and became solid, vulnerable. In that instant, every weapon in the human Dominion fleet that could target it opened fire. The architect ship died in a brilliant explosion that sent shockwaves through both the physical and psychic realms. The destruction of their vessel seemed to genuinely surprise the architects. Sarah could feel their collective attention focusing on the disruption technology with something that might have been respect. "Interesting," the voice spoke again in their minds. "You have learned to wound us. Perhaps you are not entirely without potential after all." But rather than retreat, the architects pressed their attack with renewed fury. They had been testing their opponents, studying their capabilities. Now they began to fight in earnest. The lead vessel, the massive polyhedron, began to unfold itself in ways that defied geometry. Each face split and expanded, revealing internal structures that contained entire armies of smaller craft. These were not ships in any conventional sense, they were living constructs of crystallized thought and energy, each one piloted by a fragment of the architect consciousness. The swarm that emerged numbered in the thousands, each craft capable of independent action while remaining part of a greater whole. They moved through space like a school of predatory fish, flowing around obstacles and striking with perfect coordination. All wings, evasive maneuvers. Sarah commanded, but she knew it was already too late. The human and Dominion forces were outnumbered 10-1, and their enemies were adapting to every tactic they employed. The turning point came when Overlord Thane made a decision that would have been unthinkable during the height of the Human-Dominion War. Breaking formation, his flagship Eternal Fury positioned itself directly between the main architect force and the retreating human vessels. "Thane, what are you doing?" Sarah demanded over the comm. "What should have been done long ago," the Dominion commander replied, his voice carrying a strange peace. "My people were warriors before we met your species, Commander Chen. We know how to die well." The Eternal Fury engaged its emergency overload protocols, pushing its fusion reactors beyond safe parameters while simultaneously firing every weapon in its arsenal. The massive vessel became a miniature star for several seconds before erupting in an explosion that temporarily disrupted the architect formation. In that moment of chaos, Sarah saw their chance. "All ships, focus fire on the primary target. Now." The combined fleet concentrated every remaining weapon on the unfolded polyhedron at the center of the architect formation. For a few precious seconds, their concentrated firepower overwhelmed even the aliens' defensive capabilities. The ancient vessel shuddered under the assault, cracks appearing in its crystalline structure. But it wasn't enough. Even as they watched, the damage began to heal, the cracks sealing themselves as the ship drew power from sources beyond their understanding. That's when Dr. Webb's voice crackled over the comm from his position aboard one of the research vessels. Sarah. The energy pattern, I understand it now. They're drawing power from the other sites across the galaxy. If we can sever that connection. How? Sarah shouted back as another wave of architect fighters swept through their formation. The disruption field, if we overload the generators, we can create a massive feedback pulse. It might be enough to temporarily cut them off from their power network. But the overload will destroy every ship in the field, including ours. Sarah felt time slow around her as the implications sank in. They could hurt the architects, maybe even stop them temporarily, but it would cost them everything. She looked around the bridge at the faces of her crew, young men and women who had followed her through impossible battles, who trusted her to find a way to victory even when none seemed possible. Do it, she said quietly. Commander. Lieutenant Kane looked at her with shock. You heard the man. Initiate overload sequence on all disruption generators. Sarah's voice was calm, final. Signal all ships to evacuate who can, but maintain defensive positions until the last possible moment. Across the fleet, the order was received with a mixture of acceptance and defiance. Some ships broke formation, their crews hoping to escape the coming conflagration. Others, particularly the veterans who had served through the worst of the Dominion War, held their positions and continued fighting. The architects seemed to sense what was coming. Their attacks intensified, attempting to destroy the generator arrays before the overload could complete. But they had underestimated the determination of beings who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. As the disruption field began to collapse in on itself, creating a cascade reaction that warped spacetime in increasingly violent ways, the architect vessels found themselves caught in a trap of their own making. Their connection to the galactic power network flickered and died, leaving them suddenly vulnerable and mortal. The feedback pulse, when it came, was visible from 3 star systems away. Space itself seemed to scream as the artificial constraints on reality collapsed, releasing energies that had been building for days. The architect fleet, caught at the epicenter of the disruption, was torn apart by forces they couldn't control or redirect. But the victory came at a terrible price. Of the 1,000 ships that had entered the Vega system, fewer than 50 escaped the conflagration. The Prometheus was among the casualties, its hull cracked open by the reality storm that followed the generator overload. In her final moments, as emergency bulkheads failed and the void rushed in to claim her ship, Sarah Chan felt a strange sense of peace. They had done the impossible, they had wounded gods and lived to tell about it, if only briefly. But as consciousness faded, she heard something that filled her with hope rather than despair. From across the galaxy, communication arrays were crackling to life with reports of architect sites going dark, their power severed by the feedback pulse. The ancient beings were retreating, their carefully laid plans disrupted by the sacrifice of a single fleet. Humanity and the Dominion had bought the galaxy time, perhaps centuries, perhaps millennia, before the architects could recover and try again. It would have to be enough. In the aftermath of the Battle of Vega, as it would come to be known, the surviving ships limped back to friendly space carrying news of both victory and loss. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but everyone understood that it was only a reprieve. The architects still existed, somewhere in the depths of space, and they would not make the same mistakes twice. Admiral Harrison, reading the after-action reports from his office on New Earth, felt the weight of the future pressing down on him. They had learned that they were not alone in the galaxy, that powers existed beyond their comprehension, powers that viewed them as little more than insects to be catalogued and controlled. But they had also learned something else. Working together, the children of the galaxy could accomplish miracles. Human ingenuity combined with Dominion courage had achieved what neither species could have managed alone. As he began drafting the orders that would transform the galaxy's approach to exploration and defense, Harrison couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the dark between the stars. The architects had been imprisoned once by the ancestors of current civilizations. What had those ancient peoples known that had been lost to time? The search for those answers would define the next chapter of galactic history. In research stations and universities across human and Dominion space, scholars began poring over newly discovered archaeological sites with fresh eyes, looking for clues about the power that had once bound the architects. They found evidence of a great alliance, a coalition of species that had recognized the threat posed by the architects' desire for absolute order. These ancient peoples had developed technologies specifically designed to counter reality manipulation, weapons that functioned by enforcing natural law rather than breaking it. But most importantly, they found something that gave hope for the future, evidence that the galaxy itself was alive in some sense, a vast ecosystem that naturally resisted attempts to reshape it according to external will. The architect's power was great, but it was ultimately foreign to this reality. Given time and preparation, it could be countered. On a dozen worlds, new research facilities began construction, their purpose to study and develop defenses against reality manipulation. Human creativity merged with Dominion tactical doctrine and the ancient wisdom of predecessor civilizations to create something unprecedented, a truly galactic defense against threats from beyond normal spacetime. The work would take generations to complete, but for the first time since the architect's awakening, there was genuine reason for hope. The galaxy had faced its greatest test and survived, not through the strength of any single species, but through the power of unity in the face of extinction. In the depths of space, beyond the reach of conventional sensors, the surviving architects gathered in their hidden strongholds to plan their next move. They had underestimated the younger races, allowed emotion and memory to cloud their judgment. It would not happen again. But they too had learned from the battle. The children of the galaxy had grown clever, had developed weapons that could threaten even ancient powers. Perhaps it was time to try a different approach, not conquest, but seduction. Show them the benefits of order, the peace that came with perfect harmony. After all, they had time. The architects had waited 10,000 years, they could wait 10,000 more. And in that time, they would prepare, they would adapt, and when they returned, they would be ready for whatever desperate tricks their opponents might devise. The galaxy had won its first victory against the ancient threat, but as new alliances formed and old boundaries dissolved in the face of a common enemy, everyone understood that this was merely the beginning. The real war, the war for the soul of the galaxy itself, was yet to come. In the end, as stars continued their ancient dance and new worlds spun in the darkness, the future remained unwritten. Humanity and its allies had proven that even gods could bleed, but they had also learned that the universe held threats beyond their wildest nightmares. The only certainty was that whatever came next, they would face it together. The age of single-species dominance was over. The age of galactic unity had begun, forged in the fires of desperate battle against an enemy that sought to reshape existence itself. And somewhere in the space between stars, where reality grew thin and strange energies danced in patterns that defied comprehension, the first hints of other powers began to stir. The architect's awakening had sent ripples through dimensions unknown, alerting other ancient intelligences to the growing potential of the younger races. The galaxy had survived its first test, but greater challenges awaited in the darkness between worlds. The children of the stars would need to grow quickly if they hoped to face what was coming. But for now, in this moment of hard-won peace, they could look up at the night sky and know that they had earned their place among the stars through courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of war. The awakening was over. The true battle for the galaxy's future was about to begin.